Good afternoon. This is Parenting Through Trauma. Welcome to our first episode, Child on Parent Violence. I'm Maureen O'Neill Davis. I'm your host today, and I'm here with Family Forward Advocacy Connecticut Co-Founder, Cheri Brown. Family Forward Advocacy Connecticut is a parent and policy advocacy organization formed by parents for those parenting through trauma. We focus on supporting family integrity and raising awareness on the impact of early trauma on kids and the experience of their nurturing, devoted parents. As I said, I'm here today with my Family Forward partner and co-founder, Cheri Brown. I'll just say a few words.
Hey, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. This is a great idea that Maureen had, putting together a few podcasts to give you all some information about the vast experience that we've had and that you've had. You just don't know that you're not alone. And we're here to share with you and assure you of some of the things that you're experiencing and what that's all about.
Thanks. So today we're going to get started on a topic that Cheri and I both know an awful lot about, and that is child on parent violence. When I talk to people, and I know when you talk to people, sometimes they don't understand what the difference is between a typical child having a temper tantrum and maybe hitting a parent during that experience versus what we tend to see with kids who come from a really complex trauma history and what that aggression towards the caregiver really looks like. And so, one of the things they ask me is, how does that happen?
Well, as you know, one of the biggest basis for it happening is our children, through the complex trauma, their brains have developed slightly differently, and they regress into a fight, flight, or freeze center of their brain when triggered. And when they get there, they seek control most of all. They don't trust what's around them. Least of all, they don't trust the loving parent, caregiver, who's trying to envelop them lovingly. They want to push back on that for a multitude of reasons. And if they can't push back any other way, they're going to do it violent. If they're not having success any other way, they're just going to beat the love out of you to see if they can make you stop loving them. Prove what's going on in their brain to tell them you can't be trusted is actually true and accurate.
So when my daughter was younger, between say 5 and 8, what that looked like was banging on furniture, lunging at me, weaving in, not just hitting me, but also self-harm. And it became kind of just a whole evolution of aggressive, out of control behaviors that became more and more unsafe. As she got older, it really became a lot more directed at me, sometimes just physical and other times with the use of a weapon. And it was really hard to navigate that because what we tried to do and what I tried to do, and I think what all of us do, is we think about minimizing those behaviors and making it more safe for ourselves and for the other siblings in the house. But at the same time, you're watching your child unravel and escalate, and you've got to respond to that without getting yourself hurt. Do you have any tricks on?
You have to keep them safe and yourself safe and everybody else around. The tricks I had for everything with my children, and as both of us share, our families were formed through adoption, was just continually confirming for them what happened to you was not your fault. How you react to it is something you can control, and I'm here to help you. When they're in the midst of it, when they're having a complete dysregulated meltdown, violent moment, that's not the time to have a chit chat. But you need, if you have ways of, if they're small enough, if you have ways of holding them to keep them from harming themselves or you, you can do that. I'm not talking about, you know, a full-on pin them down to the ground, but some kind of comforting hold to keep them. My son used to like to punch himself in the face. So that was, you know, okay, let's see if we can keep you from doing that. But as you said, as they get older, they, you know, will do things like use weapons. I remember one time his sister, 5 years older than he is, was standing behind me in the kitchen. And he came in and he was so angry about something and he was holding a pair of scissors. And he said, I'm going to stab you right in the heart. She freaked. But I could see right in his eyes that he didn't mean it. So I wasn't frightened. I didn't react. And we got through it without incident. And we still talk. She just brought it up last week. And it's, I don't know, 14 years later. So is it 14? No, I think I did the math wrong. Let's see. 9 years later. I added the 5 years from him, age difference. So yeah, there are many things that cause our kids to go off that we can explain, and many more things that we can't explain, that we don't understand how that was a trigger for them, what caused them to launch into a dysregulated moment. So what we have to do is come up with a consistent response. It won't be tolerated. Now, that was my secret, as you say. I had them arrested. If you think you can beat up someone in the house, if you think domestic violence is okay, I understand that's what you saw when you were younger. I understand that's what you learned, and we need to help you unlearn it. So when they're not dysregulated, you talk with them about it. I remember saying to my son, would you like to grow up to be a liar? No, okay. Then when you lie, I'll give you a consequence. The same is true of violence. Now, one of the problems we have in the state of Connecticut is there's nowhere to take a child for domestic violence perpetrator counseling.
Right.
The only counseling we have in the state of Connecticut for a child is that of a victim, which is unbelievably sad, because our children that do these types of parent violent attacks, they're not going to get any help till they're 18 years old. And by then they're headed somewhere not good.
And of
So
course, if at that point there may have been something that happened, such as a crime, because there was no early consequences or interventions to help them rethink or reprogram their reactions to those triggers that they themselves don't know or don't recognize when they're younger. And then that lack of intervention that's effective at changing that thinking isn't accessible. I think that leads to a lot of adult crimes, and we see that with our adult incarceration systems. Lots of people in them that had these bursts of anger, bursts of something triggered their behavior, and now they're sitting in jail. And are they getting the treatment then, or are they still not getting it? Is it recognized as a domestic violence symptom rooted in that early trauma that may or may not have ever been identified?
Right. And it's so true. And understanding and getting them help, as you and I both agree, early is so important, and it's so difficult.
So difficult. You know, one of the things I see, and I think you saw too, was that a lot of times that aggression is directed at the mom. In your particular case, there wasn't a male or father figure in the day-to-day existence. In mine, there was. And our adoption models are a little bit different. Yours were 3 children through the foster care system. Mine were 2 kinship-placed children that had experienced significant trauma and witnessing the loss of their mother due to domestic violence. So it's a little bit different in terms of the actual history details, but the impact is really the same. And it seems like they're part of that anger that comes out or lack of felt safety, lack of felt control, seems to be directed at the maternal connection to love and safety, more so than the paternal connection. Have you seen that with families you've helped?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, all the studies that I've done, I've traveled extensively and studied under many learned psychiatrists and psychologists in this field. And what they all talk about is the same thing, is that reaction from a child to want to see if they can get you to stop loving them, that they don't trust it. They're filled with shame and all kinds of odd things that came from their past that they're carrying with them. And we represent a contradiction to that. We represent, as the loving mother, the loving caregiver, the one that says, I'm here to take care of you and keep you safe. Their brain says, yeah, ha ha ha, but I know you can't. And I'm going to prove it. And it's not a conscious thought that they have. It seriously is the path to that fight, flight, or freeze center of the brain that they were pushed to because of the violence and the trauma that they experienced early in life. My children went through lots of foster placements. So my son went through 10, my daughters went through 15. That's an awful lot of people saying, I love and care about you. And they were capable very successfully of pushing them away and having the parents say, yeah, no, you are too much trouble, too much work.
And I think in our situation with my children, and my daughter, who's most profoundly affected by this, I think another layer of that was she witnessed the death of her mother, mother who was supposed to be there to keep her safe. And now not only has that mother not kept her safe, but there's the abandonment right before her eyes. There's the energy in the room of the violence that contributed to that. There are the sights and sounds. And then there's the aftermath, which was her being removed from that scene and brought to yet another unknown place with unknown people, in an environment she had no connection to. So that impact of panic, lack of control, not being kept safe by her mom anymore, and then me being one of the first people she happened to see that particular day, I think all contributes to a felt level of I'm not safe. I can't be trusted. She should not let me be in control, that she only feels safe when she's in control. And often that leads now as a teenager to bad decisions times 1,000. We're not talking about the typical teenager bad decision, but that kind of decision-making process on steroids, if you will. And so what then comes out like aggression, I think is definitely rooted in that felt fear and felt shame that she still carries with her, like your kids did.
Well, our children are very complex. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We have reactive attachment disorder combined with complex trauma. The things that went on in their brain cause a separation between their ages of their emotional age, their chronological age, and their cognitive age, which forces a delay in the development of the frontal lobe, which is the logic center of their brain. They don't think out their moves and their actions, which is why it would be so important to get them the proper therapy early to help them understand and process and shorten those gaps. When I think about how my son reacts to relationships, he's going to be 22 years old. His reaction when he has a bad, a one-on-one close relationship with a female, when it goes south, he wants to violate her. That's his response. If she says she wants to leave him, he will do everything and anything to stop her from doing it.
how do you link the behaviors he now shows in adult relationships, as a chronological adult, but probably emotionally much younger,
Right.
to that the behaviors of when he was a child, and that kind of behavior came out against and towards you?
Well, first, both your youngest and my youngest experienced their trauma when they were pre-verbal.
Yeah.
So what went on deeply affected them, but they couldn't talk about it. Even if there was therapy available when it first happened, what would that have looked like? I have no idea. And they didn't, yours came to you right away. Mine didn't come for years later. So what it looks like, um, I saw lots of transitions with my children. And anyone that knew me, family, friends, and hung with me, as many of the parents listening know, not everybody's cut out to hang in and listen to what's going on with us. It can be negative, it can be draining, and some people, they have that little voice in the back of their head where there's smoke, there's fire. If they're having this much trouble, there must be something wrong with the parent. And it leads to breaks in relationship with families and friends, which makes it even harder to parent our kids. But all my family and friends will tell you, I always said, I see progress. I see baby steps forward. I see improvement. And it was minuscule, but I always thought sometimes it was, one step back, two forward,
Mm-hmm.
but I always saw progress.
Well, you said something earlier. I want to go back
When
to.
he first came, he would get so angry that his eyes would roll back in his head so that they were pure white. He would go into these almost fits, convulsion type fits, because he would get so angry. And I was a broken record. You come up with some kind of mantra that you say all the time, all the time, all the time, that they can begin to assimilate with the love and the caring, and it will get through. You certainly do not try and talk to them when
Well,
they're happy.
that's what you said a minute ago too. You came up with a phrase, or something you said all the time, and I did that too. When I came to realize that was something that would be safe, secure for them, and something they could count on,
Right?
as always being what they were going to hear. What I came up with is, I know this is hard. And with that particular phrase, my thinking about it was that I'm validating the experience they're having in the moment. I'm not apologizing and opening myself up to be targeted with anything that could come out of this episode. And I used the tone of voice as often as I was able to, that was calm, regulated, and with a easy to hear tempo. And so that was really my strategy when they were younger, and when my daughter's needs were most profound in that younger age range. As she got older, though, it didn't work as well. And I was really looking for a new strategy, a new phrase, a new tempo, something that would feel more authentic for her in that moment. And sometimes I did go back to old safety and say, I know this is hard, but the energy in the space was so electrified with rage and electrified with fear, that she couldn't hear it. Did you have that experience too?
Yes. And mostly we compare our kids to regular kids. So we say, okay, regular kids. If you say a regular kid comes to you and says, Mom, can I go out and play? and they haven't done a single thing you asked them to do. So you say no. Or you say yes after you clean your room. Or yes after you do the dishes.
Very typical.
If you say yes, our brains are open to hear what comes after. If you say no, it's shut down. It's the same thing with our kids, it's just amplified. So if you can find those ways in, and every child's just a little bit different. And you know, your walk is 10 years after my walk. It just so happens to have worked out that way. But the steps that we went through, the trauma that we went through, same thing. And it has to be said that it was amplified by the Department of Children and Families.
In our situation, it definitely was. And one of the things I want to move over to real quick is when we look at the Mayo Clinic, for instance, and they talk about risk factors for kids, and what circumstances they come from that would lead to the behaviors that we're talking about today, which is the one behavior of child on parent violence. They talk about kids who live in children's homes or institutions, frequently change foster homes or caregivers, have parents who have severe mental health problems themselves, criminal behavior or substance abuse that impairs their parenting, or have prolonged situations where they're in the hospital or caregivers in the hospital when they're very young. I think that's a little bit limiting for what we see, because I know both of us talk with and work with parents who adopted children from birth, adopted children who were maybe 6 weeks old, perhaps went to foster care for a very short period of time, but wound up with an adoptive family very quickly. In my case, we also have a child we adopted from birth outside of the foster care system through a private placement. Some of those kids also experience these behaviors that we're talking about. And it seems like in some of these kids, it's not necessarily rooted to the high adverse childhood experiences they had after birth, but it can also be rooted in just the loss of a biological parent, that the birthing process occurred and that connection to maternal safety was severed, and that child ends up with a really great parent or parents in an adoptive model, but they still end up with all these behaviors that we're talking about.
Some can come from in utero. There's a whole struggle that goes on for children who are born addicted, who are born to parents who even just smoke cigarettes, that it restricts the blood flow and puts them in a survivor mode in the womb. And it affects their mental cognitive development, their ability to trust and bond is impaired.
Yeah, we've seen that. One day I was at our legislative office building here in Connecticut for some reason that I cannot remember, and I met a woman walking through the hall, and for whatever reason we struck up a conversation. She wasn't there having to do with the same reasons I was, and we just struck up a conversation. A couple minutes into that conversation, she notes that she had had a lot of problems with her daughter, a biological child, and we determined through the conversation that there was a lot of child on parent violence early, that she was very aggressive and hostile towards her mom. And then we find out that mom had divorced the dad when she was young, and the stepdad came in when she was very young. But what we also found out, what I found out during this conversation, was that this child had spent months in the hospital after she had been born, that she had some sort of rare condition that needed a lot of hospitalizations and some surgeries. And the mom not only had never thought about that as early childhood trauma, not being with her mom through that time, not having her basic needs met, not making the eye contact and cooing that is so important. She didn't think about that. And And during her course of taking her daughter to therapists, anything having to do with early childhood trauma, reactive attachment disorder, PTSD, was never considered as a possible diagnosis.
Right.
Therefore, there was never a shift in the kind of therapeutic services they were getting to be more appropriate for those behaviors and how they were manifesting into aggressive behavior. Have you seen
And
that?
the children know that, and they know it better than we did. So long time ago, I went and gave a talk before the Connecticut legislature. I was asked to come in as part of some testimony that I don't remember now. But I told them, I said, well, let's suppose that your child has cancer, which I hope and pray none of your children do, but let's just say that one of them did. And they're trusting you to take them to a doctor to get that addressed. Now they know how they feel. They know for internal senses what's wrong. They can't define it, and they know they need help with it. The same is true for our kids. But let's say that your child has cancer and you take them to a podiatrist. Podiatrist puts them through all kinds of tests and talks to them and examines them, and they don't feel any better. Same thing is true with us when we take them to a therapist that is ineffective.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So the kids, it's all rolled up into how adopted children are trying to bond and trust these strangers that claim they love them and can help them. It's a mix. It's so much of it that goes on in the entire world where people are stepping up and trying to help children. But in my case, I adopted a sibling, and they came from terrible violence in and substance abuse and alcoholism and older sibling abuse and the whole bit from a biological family, and then went through all foster care placements. And it should be said they had 12 different DCF social workers during that period of time. So their disconnectedness was off the charts. But Dr. Stephen Spector is a well-renowned psychiatrist in Connecticut, child psychologist. And he examined my son. He was brought in by the school district to examine my son when he was in 3rd grade. He'd already been expelled from a private school, but he had a great 2nd grade teacher. So he made it through that year. And what was great about her is she was firm, like I am. You set the mark, you hold him to it, he feels safe, and everything's fine. The 3rd grade teacher that he was assigned was very namby-pamby. Well, if that doesn't work for you, honey, we'll just go over here. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to mop the floor with you. So in comes Dr. Spector to meet and do an evaluation. And he said to me, I will stake my reputation that your son did not have reactive attachment disorder until he was placed with you and the department reunified him after 10 months.
Interesting.
Very interesting, because one would think being removed at 1, going through all those placements, but he was very loving with me for the first 10 months. And then when he was 5 when he was taken. And then, of course, he was gone for 6 months and came back, and he came back slightly different.
So that consistency of caregiving and having the child's needs met or not met, we often refer to reactive attachment disorder coming out of those pre-verbal years, but it could in fact be linked to circumstances of those same issues into ages 4, 5, and 6 as well. And it sounds like
it is most prominent at 4 or under. Or
so,
prevalent. Prevalent is a better word.
So I'm just going to say right here, if you just joined us, this is Parenting Through Trauma, our first episode, Child on Parent Violence. I'm Maureen O'Neill Davis, and I'm here with Cheri Brown. We are co-founders of Family Forward Advocacy Connecticut, and we are hosting this podcast. our first episode talking about child on parent violence, and we've kind of had a discussion around where it comes from. We haven't really touched too much on what it looks like or what parents can do to manage these behaviors. One of the things you said early on in our discussion, Cheri, was about consequences. There are natural consequences, and there are consequences that are linked more to societal expectations.
Mhm.
So when one is parenting a child that does not have a trauma history like ours, you can offer a consequence like time alone, go to your room, time
Take
out.
away the electronics.
Exactly. That's an imposed consequence.
Right.
But when we're talking about our kids, our traumatized kids and the traumatized brain, what happens when a parent gives that kind of a consequence? Where does the child's brain go? Do they learn from that consequence, or does something else happen?
Well, my kids always said I was very creative with my consequences. I didn't do, timeout, that kind of stuff. They were related to what was going on. So if, let's say, um, I'm putting dinner on the table and someone is triggered. Granted, I had 3 children, all with the same maladies, which is unheard of, but we did it. So one child gets angry and throws their dinner dish. Consequence is, you know what I mean by throws it. You just slam it right off the table. Well, next meal you get to sit on the floor. Plate doesn't have to go very far. You can sit right next to it, but you don't get to sit at the table. You abused what was naturally there for you, and this is the consequence. So my son, when he lied, he said, okay, I don't care for what's coming out of your mouth, so I'm going to give you something that you don't care for to put in your mouth. And I remember his older sisters. Now, this is part of how their trauma brain works. When I said that, they were both like, oh, are you going to give him like soap in his mouth or hot sauce? And I'm like, no, I was thinking like green beans because he doesn't like green beans. So they laughed and we moved on. But that kind of thing, we do have to be creative. But along the question that you asked, one thing that I did do, and I helped a lot of moms, I ran a parent support group in my home for 10 years through the Yukon Adoption Assistance Program. The moms would come to me and they would come to my home on Saturdays. Their kids were welcome. I have a lovely home that enables me to have the kids nearby, closely supervised, but we could still talk privately and support each other. Don't you love it when the thought goes like that?
Talking about the experience of what a consequence is for the child. You talked about your son sitting on the floor for dinner because that was a consequence, and then you moved on to talking about helping other parents kind of identify those types of consequences.
Thank you. I took them to self-defense classes. And one of the things that you learn in a self-defense class is how to protect yourself, because, but how to also be ready. So we can't live our lives going around expecting some kid's going to come up and clock us upside the head when we're not expecting it. Usually we can see it coming. It may only be a few seconds notice, but it's enough for us to put our feet in the proper direction so that when the stuff comes, we don't get knocked over. We don't get knocked over. We don't get knocked over emotionally. We don't get knocked over physically. A few of the things that I learned is how to deflect a blow. So if someone's coming at you, you're not going to grab the child, you're not going to hurt the child, but you're not going to get knocked over and they're not going to land a solid punch. You're going to deflect, and their motion is going to give them send them in that direction. Learning how to survive in our environment. We don't live in the middle of a war zone in Africa, thank God. So we don't have to learn those skills, but we can't make believe that we don't live in a house with violence. We have to acknowledge that it's there. We have to be ready to deal with it. And we have to be ready to teach how to deal with it. The other people in the house, anyone that might be over. I've had tutors here for one child while another child is going off, and the tutor's like, so you have to be ready to explain and teach and understand and not lose it. The biggest thing is to remember is we're the adults. We're the people put in place, I happen to believe by God, to help these children, to help them heal, to teach them. So we need to be ready to do that. We can't be ready to freak out or have our own trauma, anything that we may have had from our past come into play that's going to be a problem in trying to help them. So one of the things we have to do is also resolve our own stuff that may be triggered by their behavior. As soon as we know it's there, go get it taken care of, whatever it is, and be ready. Do self-defense classes. It only takes a couple. I happen to have found a pair of black belts that were willing to give self-defense classes for $5 an hour to
That's amazing.
To any parent that needed it.
So the resources are out there. Sometimes you have to look high and low, and other times they kind of come to you because the universe recognizes that that's what you need.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back a little bit to one of the things a lot of parents are very confused about when the child is under the age of 10 and the aggression and physical violence towards the parent or towards another sibling in the household has gotten to a very dangerous level, has picked up in frequency. When is an appropriate time for a parent to call 911? Is there ever an appropriate time for a parent to call 911 on a child?
I had my children arrested 12 times. So 11 times for perpetrating violence on me, one time, one child perpetrating violence on another. So
was that a tough decision for you to make when you made that call? Because I know for me it was.
Well, the first time violence happened in my home to that degree, I called my pastor because it was a Sunday afternoon. We had just walked in the door from church. So that was, my brain was connected to that. But as time went on, I realized that was not teaching anything about this is not what you do when you feel that way. Our children will also seek negative attention. So if an interaction with someone, a pastor, a beloved friend, is obtained because they are violent, that becomes self-perpetuating. So you don't want to do that.
Right.
So that's the path it took for me to be able to call the police, to be able to say, you can't rip a hunk of hair out of my head or threaten to stab me with a knife and have it just sit there. We can't just say, oh, I'll wait for you to calm down and then we'll talk about it. Yeah, I will wait for you to calm down and we can talk about it. But in the interim, there's a consequence. Unfortunately, what I found through the process, as many people listening to this already know, there's no place to go to get them any other kind of help.
That's correct.
Now, every time my children were arrested, they also went inpatient. Now, whether that was 24 hours at an ER or a week or two or three or a couple of months, at an acute care inpatient stay. It was always associated because everyone involved could see that it was a mental health situation. And the court dismissed the arrest charges. But the arrest, in my opinion, in the opinion of the therapist, in the opinion of the police, the local police, was necessary as part of the process. It wasn't my decision. I didn't call up 911 and say, hey, I need you to come over and arrest my kid. I called 911 and said, I need help.
And that's another good point. In our particular case, when I was pushed to that point, we were also made aware of 211. In Connecticut, 211 is a state information system. Right now, it's operated by the United Way. And one of the services you are able to access through that 211 platform is emergency mobile psychiatric services. I think the name has changed recently, but essentially a clinical triage group to respond in your area within a certain amount of time, either on the phone or in person, depending on the severity of what's happening in the home at that point. Sometimes I have seen that work in some geographical areas because the team can respond more quickly in person. There was less going on within the hours that the call came in. But often what I find out is if you make that 211 call because the episode is escalating, you as the parent don't feel safe, or you're fearing for the safety of the other children in the home, you make the call, you're on hold for a really long period of time. Meanwhile, you're supposed to be keeping your children safe from the child who is escalated to an unsafe level, or keep that child safe from doing something to themselves, which can also happen, as you know, in those moments. But then the 211 folks will come on, and as I've told them what was occurring, they say, "Oh no, call 911." So now I've used the tool in the service array in the state to help parents when there's child episodes that become very unsafe. And it fails because I've now wasted a prolonged period of time where any number of things could have or did happen in the home that were safety concerns. And now I'm waiting still for police to arrive because we have to hang up the phone, make another call, go through the dispatch process, and wait another 5 or so minutes, 10 minutes till police arrive. And when they arrive, it's a whole different experience for everyone involved. Right. And often that child on parent violence lens that the clinicians would have had shifts to a parent questioning model by the police, at least early on when the kids are younger, that somehow what is happening and the escalation of this child aggression towards the parent is rooted in something the parent did. And so that engagement changes. And I think the natural consequence that the child should be receiving for their behaviors rooted in that felt sadness, felt fear, felt shame gets completely lost. And then there is no consequence, right, which allows that behavior model to continue to evolve, continue to get reinforced.
Yep. And their struggle for control is validated.
Right. It's affirmed that they should be fighting for control, and that makes sense. And their brain sees that.
Yep. I have helped many parents, like you're saying, that have had bad experiences with calling 911. They've had very judgmental police that come out that are not looking at the situation. They have a preconceived idea about what's going on. They also really have no idea how they can help.
And in a future episode, that's cut you off. In a future episode, we're going to delve into what parents can do ahead of time to be proactive with their local police department to not ensure, but certainly put the foundation in place to have the call to police and the response by police to look and feel different, a much more helpful model.
Yeah, I had really good experiences with my local police department. Excellent, as a matter of fact. So it is possible and you can do it. I had excellent experiences with the school system and the people there, and it can happen. So I've got a lot of experience like you do, helping other parents that have not had good experiences and some that have had better experiences. So knowing you're not alone, listening to some of these podcasts, understanding what's going on for other people, what can go on for you, it's all part of it. Calling 211, one of the things that can happen, did happen to me, did happen to other people, they're mandated reporters. Over the phone, if they hear something they don't like, they're going to open a DCF investigation, which, as you said, you have to hang up 211, you have to call 911, and next thing you know, somebody's knocking at your door, and it just becomes this cavalcade of events that you then not only have to navigate yourself through, but you have to help your children navigate through as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about a lot that has to do with that as this podcast grows and we launch more episodes. So thank you for pointing that out. Before we finish up, one thing I was hoping we could talk a little bit about is a few additional strategies or tips, things that a parent who might be listening to this podcast today, let's say their child was adopted through the foster care system. The social workers have informed that parent that there's no possibility that this child has any kind of reactive attachment disorder, complex trauma impact. They were only in 3 foster homes, and you just need to love this child enough and give them the structure and support and nurturing that they need, consistency that they need, and whatever you're seeing right now is going to go away and be rectified. And that doesn't happen. And that parent is not getting the support that they need from maybe the social worker who facilitated the placement, or the social worker who has signed on as the adoption support social worker. They're not getting heard very well by their physician or by the clinician that's involved, because it's not the right clinician with the right training. Right. What kind of things can we offer to that parent?
Call UConn Adoption Assistance Program.
If you're in Connecticut.
Find out some of the other alternative therapies that are available out there, equestrian therapy. There's a multitude. Don't be afraid to look for a therapist that specializes, regardless of the label, that specializes in children with adverse behaviors, whatever the cause. Forget who wants to put what label on it. I know my son had 8 different diagnoses until the DSM-5 came out. And then they said, oh, he's on the autism spectrum. Okay, we're not telling him that. He's got enough labels. He doesn't need to hear that. It's not going to change anything anyway. At that point, he was 15 years old. It's like, he doesn't, maybe 14. He doesn't need to hear that you guys have come up with another label. He knows he has issues. We're just going to stick with what we got.
Well, and not only that, but a lot of the symptoms, the visible symptoms, the conduct symptoms of attachment and trauma impact can resemble a lot of these other symptoms. And sure. So you as a parent are directed to or find a clinician or psychiatrist, psychologist that you have been led to believe is the one that's going to be able to help you. And that one brings to the table their own education, their own familiarity, their own history of cases, and they're going to look at your child's symptoms as described by you and the child. They're going to run it through their lens that informs the work that they've been doing, and they're going to come up with a diagnosis and even the evaluations that can be really valuable, can often lead an unfamiliar therapist to misdiagnose because of that lens that they bring to the table.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
that's tough for a parent.
There's a lot to navigate. So what we're talking about today with the child on parent violence, there are many stories, world-renowned stories about parents that will go so far as to get, a two-family house and keep the violent child in one house and the other children in the other, just to keep them safe. And
That's commitment.
that's commitment. But even there, showing that level of commitment, that level of love doesn't alter the child's mental state and their behavior. Eventually it will, because eventually that age separation, emotional, chronological, and cognitive separation narrows. Eventually the logic center of the brain does fully develop. And then you've got a shot at really reasoning, and the child can take the history and piece it all together and look at all the love and caring that was poured out to them all over the years and say, wow, you really do love me. But when they're younger and their brains are twisted, all you can do is take care of you, keep them safe. And I spent a ton of money just keeping them alive till they turned 18 because the therapies they needed were not covered by insurance. And they had to have it. They were in desperate straits.
And not all parents are fortunate enough to have enough income coming in consistently to meet a lot of these needs. And we also know that because of these needs, a lot of times even a professional, higher earning parent has to leave their job in
Right.
order to be the more present, more consistent, more system interfacing parent, which becomes a full-time job.
That brings up a good point. I mean, thankfully, I used to say, my kids would say, Mom, are you going to get married? And I'm like, well, if God wants me to get married, he'll send me a husband. But I was grateful going through everything with my kids that I didn't have a husband or that other person with a different upbringing, a different set of backgrounds, potentially their own things that they brought to the table to have to compete with or argue with about what steps were best for the children. But besides that, there goes that thought. I think we've been talking too long. I'm losing my train of thought here. But I know what it was.
Okay,
The fact that my job was my respite. And anyone who's trying to do this, who doesn't have an outside interest, who thinks staying at home, and maybe they're even trying to homeschool the child, and they've got child or children, and they're with these children 24/7, bad idea. You need to get out of it. You need perspective. You need sanity. You need that time. And my job, they were in school or in summer camp, and my job was my respite. I was a business executive, and it took all my brain power to run companies, and that's what I did. So yes, there were phone calls that interrupted, and there were days when I couldn't go to work, but by and large, that having a job, a really good job that took my brain out of it, allowed me to come home renewed, refreshed, ready, able to deal.
And that's such a great point. And we've seen that, both of us have seen that in families that we've worked with. And I can think of a few off the top of my head where that was not at play and the parent really spiraled in the dysfunction. The parent was so
there's resentment that comes in sometimes too.
Absolutely.
Like, look at everything I've given up for you. No. Can't go there. They've got enough on them already.
Right. So Parenting Through Trauma, as you can tell, has a lot of pieces to it. And over the next several months, we're going to drop several episodes that talk about different topics having to do with the traumatized brain, the child's altered perspective of their environment, their inability to effectively interpret the safety, calm, and allow control of a safe adult to raise them, to give them the boundaries and the bumpers, if you will, to get through their early life and teen years. And we encourage you to check out our future podcasts. We'll be dropping those podcast episodes bi-weekly to start with, and then as we get a little better at this, we hope to go weekly. You can find us on Spotify, and within a month, we should also be up on YouTube with Parenting Through Trauma podcast on YouTube. You can check us out on our website at familyforwardadvocacyct.com. There you will find some courses that we're going to be launching. We work with families through direct services. We offer some educational pieces that you will find. They will be launching in April. And if you have any questions or you think you are in need of some support, please email us. You can email us from our Contact Us page. You can also find us at familyforwardact@gmail.com. And we encourage you to reach out. Cheri and I will be back here again with another episode in the next week or two. Is there anything you'd like to add to our Child on Parent Violence episode as we close today, Cheri?
Just the one thing I tell every parent that I endeavor to advocate for and with, remember you're not alone.
You are not alone. That is absolutely true. And too many of us feel like we are when we're in it.
Yeah.
You are not alone. There are people there who have walked in your shoes, and we're two of them, and we are here to help you. Please find us on our website, and we hope to see you at our next podcast. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Cheri.